In a limestone cave in northern Spain, there's a faded red disc painted on a wall. It is a simple shape, a circle, made by blowing pigment through a hollow bone onto cold stone. Nothing about it looks remarkable, except its age. Uranium-thorium dating puts that disc at over 40,800 years old. It may be the oldest known deliberate mark made by a human hand on Earth. Whoever painted it did not do it near the entrance, where light still reached. They went past the point where the sun disappears, past the point where the air turns cold and still. They stopped somewhere in the dark, took out a hollow bone, filled their lungs with red ochre dust, and blew a circle onto the rock. Then they left, and at some point they came back, because that disc is not alone. It is one mark among thousands, scattered across hundreds of cave systems on a single continent, made across a span of more than 30,000 years. Most people assumed this was simple decoration. Early humans, bored in the dark, doodling on stone. But the deeper you look into where this art was placed, and who was making the journey to place it, the less that explanation survives contact with the evidence. Here is the part that rarely gets said clearly enough. Ancient humans did not live in these deep chambers. They live at the mouth of the cave, in what archaeologists call the twilight zone, where daylight still reaches and smoke from a fire can escape. That part matches common sense. Shelter from wind, a roof against rain, a defensible position against predators. But the art is not there. The art is buried far past that line, in sections of the cave that show no hearths, no food debris, no bedding, no signs of daily life at all. Getting to it required crawling, sometimes for hundreds of meters, through spaces barely wide enough for a human body. This breaks the tidy assumption that caves were simply prehistoric homes. A home does not require you to crawl on your stomach through total darkness to reach the living room. So the question shifts. If it wasn't for shelter and it wasn't for food, something else pulled people past the safety line, deep enough that a single wrong turn meant never finding a way back to daylight. At El Castillo Cave in Cantabria, Spain, that red disc sits in a passage researchers had to survey using ropes and headlamps, far past any area suitable for habitation. Alistair Pike's dating team used uranium-thorium analysis on the calcite crust that had formed over the pigment, a method that gives a minimum age, meaning the painting could be even older than 40,800 years. At Altamira, less than 30 kilometers away, the famous ceiling of polychrome bison sits in a chamber low enough that an adult would have had to work bent over or lie on their back, holding a lamp in one hand and a pigment-loaded tool in the other, painting upward into stone for hours at a time. At the cave of Trois-Frères in the French Pyrenees, deep in a chamber accessible only after a difficult descent, there is a painted figure unlike anything else in the region, a four with the antlers of a stag, the ears of a wolf, the eyes of an owl, and the legs of a human, standing upright. Archaeologists call it the sorcerer. No one has found a second explanation for it that fits the evidence better than a symbolic, non-literal figure, something that was never meant to represent a real animal at all. At Pech Merle in the Lot region of France, painted horses are covered in dark spots that do not match the horse's actual coat pattern, which DNA analysis of preserved horse remains from the same period later confirmed. The spots were not observation. They were interpretation. None of these sites show evidence of permanent living in the chambers where the art appears. What they show, consistently, is intention. Someone carried pigment, tools, and light sources with the explicit purpose of marking a wall that almost no one would ever casually walk past. Here is where it gets stranger. This is not a small, occasional behavior. It appears across enormous stretches of time, and it appears to be structured, not random. Evolutionary anthropologists have a name for behavior like this: costly signaling. The theory, developed to explain rituals and displays across many species and human cultures, argues that when a behavior is difficult, risky, or wasteful in survival terms, it can function as an honest signal, proof of commitment, skill, or belonging that cannot be faked, because faking it would require paying the same real cost. Under this theory, walking deep into a dangerous cave was not despite the risk. It was because of the risk. The danger was the point. Anyone could claim loyalty to a group, a belief, or a rite of passage. Far fewer people could prove it by crawling half a kilometer through the dark on nothing but a handful of burning fat and moss. But that still doesn't explain everything. Because costly signaling alone doesn't account for footprints belonging to children as young as 6 or 7, found deep in several of these same cave systems, alongside adult tracks, in chambers that offered no practical reason for a child to be present at all. If this were purely adult ritual leadership, a performance meant to be witnessed and rewarded by other adults, children walking those same routes becomes much harder to explain by convenience or coincidence. It starts to look less like display and more like initiation, a structured passage from one stage of life to another, deliberately staged in the one environment guaranteed to strip away comfort, light, and certainty. The anthropologist Arnold van Gennep described the structure a century ago in human ritual generally. Separation from ordinary life, a liminal phase of disorientation and testing, and finally reintegration as a changed person. Deep caves, by pure physical accident geology, offer a near-perfect stage for exactly that structure. You leave the light. You are tested by the dark. You return. Step back. And this behavior says something bigger about what separates humans from nearly every other species alive. Animals avoid unnecessary risk. That is not a moral rule. It is close to a physical law of evolution. An animal that repeatedly enters danger with no food, no mate, and no territorial gain at the end of it does not tend to pass on its genes. Risk without payoff is punished by natural selection, consistently, across almost the entire animal kingdom. And yet humans did this. Not once, not in one region, but across a continent, across tens of thousands of years, with a consistent pattern. Difficult access, deliberate placement, repeated visits, and evidence that even children were brought into it. This suggests something about the human mind that predates agriculture, cities, and writing by tens of thousands of years, a drive toward meaning-making and group identity that does not answer to survival logic alone. Early humans were not only trying to stay alive, they were building something durable out of shared risk, a memory, a bond, a marker that said we did this together. And we are not the same people who walked in. That single fact reframes the entire story of who we were before history began. Long before the first city wall was built, humans were already treating certain places as sacred, certain experiences as necessary, and certain risks as worth taking for reasons that had nothing to do with hunger, warmth, or safety. Somewhere in northern Spain, a red disc is still on a cave wall, unchanged for more than 40,000 years. No one knows the name of the person who painted it. No one will ever know exactly what they believed they were doing, or what they felt standing alone in that darkness with a hollow bone and a mouthful of red dust. We like to imagine our earliest ancestors as simple survivors, creatures focused only on the next meal and the next threat. But the deepest chambers of these caves tell a different story. They tell us that even before written language, before permanent settlements, before almost everything we consider the beginning of civilization, humans were already walking toward danger on purpose, in search of something that had nothing to do with staying alive. Maybe that instinct never left us. Maybe it is the same one that still drives people toward difficult, costly, uncertain things, not despite the cost, but because the cost is what makes it mean something. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more. See you in the next one.